1 Timothy chapter number 4. And last night we started our series from this verse. It's where we're going to be throughout our weekend together. And so I think I've got it up here on the screen that we can look at. And so let's go ahead and say the verse together again, okay? It says this: "Let no man despise thy youth, but be thou an example of the believers in word, in conversation, in charity, in spirit, in faith, in purity." All right, everybody's there. Let's say it one more time together. Ready? "Let no man despise thy youth, but be thou an example of the believers in word, in conversation, in charity, in spirit, in faith, in purity." And so last night we started out by breaking down those first two sections of the verse, dealing with how we are to not let anyone despise our youth. There's no way that we should allow anyone to look down on us because of our youth. And the way that we do that is by simply being an example. And so last night we talked about that we would no longer surrender to low expectations of ourselves. So many people have low expectations of Christian young people today, and we should never surrender into that and allow low expectations of us to allow us to live in an immature and an ungodly manner. We should never give in to low expectations, but we should simply determine to live a life that is worth imitating. And so we drew that picture of Mr. Perino, you know? He was our example. He was our object that we were trying to imitate in a great way. Now, I didn't even see who won. Josh T-Watt, is that the one with the muscles? Oh, I figured. I should have, man. We should have had like categories of realism, you know? Still life. Fantasy art. That's what he won, the fantasy art competition. Anyway, that's good. But we're to be lives worth imitating. That was the whole picture, the idea that I was hoping that you guys got across and understood last night and then talked about in our discussion groups. But the cool thing about this verse is that Paul the Apostle is saying to Timothy, he says, listen, don't let anybody look down on you. Don't let anyone despise your age. Be an example. And then he gives us some very specific things. Because we could have ended last night and just said, be an example. And you say, be an example in what? Well, Paul continues and he gets very, very specific now through the rest of the verse. And so we're going to cover several throughout our different sessions. So this morning we're going to cover the first two that he mentions here. And he says that we are to be an example to the believers, of the believers, And then he says, first of all, in our words. So number one is in our words. That's the first subject that we're going to cover this morning. We need to be an example in our words. Now, point number one, write this down in your notes. We've got to understand the reason we need to be an example in our words is because our words are very, very powerful. You don't have to write very, very, but you could. Our words are powerful. Number one, our words are powerful. It's interesting. You don't have to read very far into the Bible to recognize the power of words. Actually, it's kind of interesting. All you have to do is to get to verse number 3 of Genesis chapter number 1 to see the power of God's words as He began to speak creation into being. By the end of chapter number 2, God had spoken everything that we know today. He had spoken everything into creation, including humanity, and He declared that everything was good. And of course, we know that God's words are very powerful. But I want you to see from that point in Genesis chapter 2, where God had created everything, and He said, behold, everything was very good. We see very quickly that mankind began to destroy the good thing that God created by their words. In chapter number 3, we see the danger, chapter 3 of Genesis, the danger of misusing words. In that passage of Genesis chapter 3, we see Satan speaking words to deceive humans. And he spoke them to Eve, and he began to deceive her and to cast doubt in her about the goodness of God. And then we see Adam speaking words to blame his wife, right? And then we see Eve trying to use her words to deflect the blame from herself. And by the time that whole situation's over in Genesis chapter number 3, we are lost and we're dying on our way to hell without God. Just like that, from their words. That was a part of it. Obviously, we know the decisions of sin that were made. But in Genesis chapter number 4, you continue on and you see that brothers are killing brothers and lying to God about it. And others are making boasts about their importance. And we just see the world just get worse and worse and worse from that point on. And a lot of it is connected to the words that people say. Write this down. Words can cause great good and they can inflict terrible harm. Words can cause great good and they can inflict terrible harm. It's no surprise then that the Bible addresses the idea of our speech, of what we say over and over and over again. And that's why Paul said to Timothy, who was a young man in ministry, That's why he focused on this idea that you need to be an example in your words. Paul uses a Greek word that you've probably heard before in your in church at some point, and it's the Greek word logos, which is the word for word. Isn't that great? It's the word for word. Yeah, logos. It means word, the word, spoken word. And it is any communication that comes out of our mouth. And I'll just say this. It is also any communication by extension that comes out of our thumbs or our fingers as we type or text or post, whatever it may be. So he's talking about how we need to be an example in our communication in the things that we speak. And it is because they're so powerful. But the reason our words are so powerful is because, number two, our words are a reflection of our heart. This is why our words are so powerful. This is why our words carry such weight. This is why what we say is so important to God, is because it is a reflection of our heart. See, Paul wanted Timothy to know that what he said had the power to make or to break his ministry. They had the power to either help or to harm people. They had the power to either encourage or to destroy. And so he emphasized the power behind them because Paul knew that our words are a reflection of our true self. What you say is a reflection of who you truly are. In Luke chapter 6 and verse number 45, I'm sure you've heard this verse before, but it says that a good man out of the good treasure of his heart bringeth forth that which is good. And an evil man out of the evil treasure of his heart bringeth forth that which is evil. And then this key, say this with me here at the end. It says, for out of the abundance of the heart, you're not saying it with me, say it again. For out of the abundance of the heart, his mouth speaketh. So what we say is an overflow of what is already in our hearts. Something that we've already thought about, something that we've already dwelt on. See, our words reveal the truth of our heart. Foul, unkind, ungodly words reveals an ugly inside, is what it reveals. In the same way, people who are kind and genuine in their words reflects an inner beauty, inner kindness. James chapter 3 and verse number 11 says, doth a fountain send forth at the same place sweet water and bitter water? Sweet water and salt water, they don't come from the same place. It's either one or the other. Salt water comes from salt water, bitter water. Unkind words come from an unkind heart. And that's the connection that he's trying to get us to make. All the way throughout Paul's other letters, he talks about that there are certain ways of speaking that should not be a part of the Christian's life. They are things that are associated with our old man, the person we were before Christ. And here's the thing that you've got to get. When we speak in these ungodly ways, when our speech reflects an ungodly thought process or an ungodly heart, what we are doing is we are destroying our credibility that we're trying to have, right, as an example. And what we are doing is we are endangering the ability for our lives to be worth imitating. Now, Paul talks about a lot of different things in his letters, but I want to point out just a couple of them that he talks about. He talks about how, as Christians, lying should not be a part of our speech. Lying should not be a part of our speech. Now, we know that, right? Yes, we know that. But how often do we lie, right? Half-truths. If I say it in this way, Miss Anna Lynn, I'm not really lying, but I'm not really saying the truth either, okay? Angry speech. Man, as teenagers, I get it. Things are happening, and sometimes we just lash out in anger so quickly. Having bitterness in our speech, slandering one another. Man, you guys live in probably the most slanderous of times. You understand the word slander? Tearing other people down. It is so easy for anyone to have a fake profile, right? And just rip on people, you know? It's terrible. And you live in a difficult time. And as Christians who are to be an example, the right example, we need to never participate in those kind of ways of taking and tearing other people down. Being abusive in our speech to others, talking about wrong and sinful things. All of this should not be the part of the Christian teenager. And I'm just going to say this because it bothers me all of the time. Neither should us taking the name of the Lord our God in vain either. I am so bothered by teenagers, Christian teenagers, who love to say, oh my God. OMG, right? Everybody says it, right? How many of you have heard it in the last week? Okay, me, I heard it, okay? From one of my kids. We had to talk about that. Man, it's a problem. And in Christian young people too, I hear it all the time. Listen, that we should not be speaking in that way. That's not being an example of the believer in that kind of way and saying those kind of things. As Christian teenagers who've given our lives to Christ, we should leave behind a desire or a focus of evil words, and we should pursue speech that reflects the new person that we are in Jesus Christ. That's what it all comes down to. Remember, we're to be an example, and so what we're trying to do here is not just focus on all the things we shouldn't do. We want to elevate the things that we should do. We talked about that a bit in our guys session. And so the things that we should be talking about, the way that we should be using our words, should be in a way of speaking the truth. It should be used to edify, to build one another up. Edification is a biblical principle, to lift one another up, to encourage one another. Man, I was trying to think about it in my youth group. I was trying to think of a time that someone spoke to me and encouraged me who was another teenager. And I couldn't think of one. I couldn't think of one. Because we think it's kind of lame to encourage one another, right? We think like, oh, they're going to think I'm super spiritual if I say, hey, what did you think of that message? I was really encouraged by that message. Did you learn anything? And we're like, we don't encourage each other in that way. But if we're to be an example to older Christians, that's one of the things that needs to be a part of our conversation. Lifting each other up. Speaking words of forgiveness one to another instead of words of gossip about each other, right? Forgiving one another in that way. Being thankful. Being tender towards each other. That's a scriptural principle of tenderness towards each other. I think we're so harsh sometimes, aren't we? Man, we're so like, I don't know did you get that? So I don't know how you describe that. That's what we are. We're like abrasive, We're not tender to each other. We're not, you older teenagers, you need to be tender to the younger teenagers. I know it's kind of a weird term, I get it. But you need to be looking to them and being kind to them. Make them like you, not hate you, right? Be nice to them. Encourage them in their walk with the Lord. This is a great way we can be an example. Because I'll tell you, even in adults, this doesn't happen all the time. There's a lot of between adults as well. There's not a whole lot of tenderness sometimes. And if we're to be an example of that, this is a great way that we can do that by demonstrating tenderness and kindness. As teenagers, we need to endeavor to model godly speech in our lives because it gives evidence of our salvation and the fact that we are walking with the Lord. We need to put to death, we need to remove the worldly focuses that we have, and we need to bring these new focuses into life because our credibility and our usefulness for God depends on it. I'll never forget the power of words. I was the first church that I worked in Texas. We had a church softball team, and we used to go out and we'd play against other churches and stuff, and there's a few fights and stuff like that. But I'll never forget this one day. We had a game, and there's a man in our church who I really respected, very successful guy. I really respected him. We spent a lot of time together, and in that day at that softball game, he struck out in slow pitch softball. Now, I don't know if you guys know how lame that is, but it's pretty lame. I mean, they throw it like this. Woo, hit it. Come on. It's like your dad used to do when you were a little kid, And they toss this massive, pillowy soft ball. It's not really soft, but they throw this huge thing. And you have a bat. I mean, it's like, come on. And he struck out. I mean, we all laughed. I get it. We all laughed. Like I laughed, I know. But when he came back to the dugout of our church softball team, wearing his church jersey, the stuff that he was saying, I mean, he was cursing. And you know what happened? As a young person, my respect level for that guy it was gone. Boom, dropped. Because this is somebody I looked up to, somebody I respected as a follower of Christ, as a Christian brother in Christ. And as soon as he started to just lay it out there, I was like, man, right? I lost all respect for him at that time. And from that point on, I had a very, very difficult time taking anything he said seriously. Because I was like, if that's in your heart. See, that was a reflection of what he was already thinking. It was a reflection. If that was the first thing that he went to in a time of crisis, striking out in slow pitch softball, that was a huge evidence of what was in his heart already. And I struggled to respect him from that point on. See, the challenge that Paul gives to Timothy here is a challenge to all of us, because Our world today gives us more opportunity and more places to share our words and to communicate than ever before in the history of mankind. There are more ways for you to have your voice be heard, for you to get your voice out there than ever before, and to express it, of course, face-to-face, but express it online, in a Facebook post, in your comments, to text it to somebody, whether it's their Instagram stories or Snapchat, if anybody's using that anymore. There's all of these things, so many ways for you to express yourself. And so as Christians who are trying to be an example, we should use those opportunities to express our faith for the Lord. Because every word displays my heart, and every word is an opportunity for us to be an example. Now think about that for a minute as you write it down. Every word displays your heart. Every word that you speak is an opportunity for you to be an example. If you could just get this in your head. Now, I've messed up in this so many times in my life. So many times in my life. And I have many regrets for speaking and saying things that carried a negative influence on them. But if you can begin to understand this right now, as a young person, it can help you so much. Every word displays your heart. I think we so often underestimate the power of words, don't we? Let me explain it to you this way. We underestimate it and we think, you know what, if I say this, it's not going to matter. If I put that out there, it's not going to matter. If I go after them, well, they say something about me, so I'm going to go after them. And we underestimate it, but every single one of you here today could give an example, a very specific example of something that someone said to you that hurt you deeply, that you remember today. How many of you be honest and say, I can think of something right now that somebody said to me, very specific, even if it was a long time ago? Raise your hand. You can tell me if you think of it, that hurt me deeply. Okay, so we recognize that. We recognize and we remember times where people said something encouraging to us as well, don't you? Man, I remember things that people said to me that I was like, wow, that's really, man, thank you. That made me feel great. That was encouraging to me. But yet in our own lives, we underestimate the power of words and we think, it doesn't really carry an impact. But we all know the impact that words have had on us. So that's why Paul says here to Timothy, you've got to be aware of your words. You have to be an example to other people in how you speak. Your words can affect people either positively or negatively. And Paul said one of the best ways that you can be an example is in your words. And so I want to challenge you this morning to be an example in your words. Younger teenagers are looking up to you. Younger kids in your church are looking up to you. I remember hearing older teenagers when I was a young kid and the stuff that they would say. And you know what I thought as a young kid? Oh, that must be okay then for me to say that. Must be okay for me to, and we learn from others. And so if we're to be an example worth following, then we need to have our speech be where it needs to be. And that is only honoring and glorifying to God and recognizing the power. I don't think a youth group yet, maybe there's one out there, I don't know. But I don't think there's been a youth group yet in the history of the world. Maybe that's a very strong statement. Maybe that's too strong of a statement. But I don't know of any youth groups personally where a youth group has gotten together and said, you know what, we are only going to speak positively and we're only going to lift each other up and we're only going to talk about things that honor God in our youth group. I don't know if that's ever happened. I think if it would happen, I think it'd be pretty incredible. If you guys determined in your church, in your youth group, say, you know what, we're not going to tear each other down. We're not going to gossip about each other. We're just going to lift each other up and we're going to be an example in our words. Paul says you've got to be an example in your words, but he also says, as we continue here, that we need to be an example in our conduct. Number 2, in our conduct. So we're moving on. Like I told you guys, the lessons are going to be pretty short because we're giving you time in your groups after this. You got to take lots of notes. You write really small. That's impressive. That's very impressive. Can you even read it? You can? Okay, all right. It's like 0.6 font. Courier New. She even writes in Courier New. That's pretty good. Nobody gets that joke anymore, I don't think. Do you guys have to do your stuff in a specific font in school? We used to have to print it out Courier New, single-spaced, and then you could always kind of fudge the spacing in your word like a little bit more, and then space the letters apart a bit more. I got to get that 4 pages done. Anyway. Today you just email your teacher, right? Email them. Okay, so let's talk about our conduct. So we're back in 1 Timothy 4, verse number 12. And we got the verse up here. He says, be thou an example in word, in conversation. Now the word conversation, it means our conduct. It means our way of life. It's how we live our lives. And so what he's trying to get across to us then as young people, we are to be examples in the decisions that we make and in the actions that we take. So we are to be examples in our conduct, the way that we live our lives, the decisions we make and the actions that we take. Now, I think we all understand, and I don't think I have to tell you guys a whole bunch of times or reiterate the fact that you know that you are to be an example in the world, how you're to be different than the world, right? Scripture tells us we're to be salt and light. We're to be different. We're to have a testimony, and we're to behave in distinctly Christian ways. But I don't want to focus on that today because I know you guys know that, and I know that you've heard it, and you've been in a youth group and your church, you know. You are to stand out as light for God in this dark world. We know those things, but I want to take this to the next level when it comes to our idea of our conduct, okay? We are, here's what I want us to get, and I think I've got it up here. We are to stand as an example of Christian conduct to those who are older and more mature in the faith. If we take the passage for what it is, he's speaking to a young man who was under the age of 40, and so he would have been looked down on because of his age. People wouldn't have thought much about him. And so when it comes to this idea of conduct for us, I want you to get that as teenagers, you need to live your life, your actions, your responses as an example to those who are older and more mature in the faith. Now that's a very intimidating thought. It's a thought that I'm intimidated by. Even as a 34-year-old, almost 35-year-old, I'm intimidated by that thought. That I should live my life so that older Christians, more mature Christians than me, would look at me as an example. But that's exactly what Paul is trying to get across here to Timothy. He was still young enough that people would look down on him, that they wouldn't expect much quality from his life. But Paul says it's still your responsibility to live in it as an example. In our discussion groups last night, we asked the question, has there been a time where you felt like people maybe didn't expect much out of you because of your age? And many of you shared stories and talked about, yes, I feel that people don't expect much of us. And that sometimes is the case. And I think that's sometimes a problem in the church, that Christians don't have expectations of Christian young people. And that's a problem that needs to be fixed, I think, from the top down. There should be expectations of you. But regardless of that, even if there are no expectations of you right now, spiritually, you still need to be an example. You must be this example. We are so good as teenagers at finding ways to get out of stuff, right? Aren't you? Teenagers' secret weapon, like Superman, like what can you do? You can fly, right? Teenagers, we have excuses. It's like any moment, we can get out of stuff, right? We have all these excuses. But the thing is, when it comes to being an example for the Lord, there is no exemption there. There is no excuse that you could come up with that I would be like, oh, I never thought of it that way. You're right. You should not be an example for the Lord. There's just not one out there. No matter what you would come up with. No reason, no past, no issues that you could come up with, say, because of this, I am not an example for the Lord. No. We're all to be examples for Christ, and we're all to live in this way. It's an all the time, every way, all of life. We're to be an example of godliness to other Christians in our youth group, but also to the church at large. Now, I'm telling you this from the perspective of somebody who's getting kind of old. Now, I don't feel old. I don't look, I'm getting gray hair, so I'm starting to look a little bit old. But from my perspective, there really... I can tell you this, there's really nothing more encouraging to me than to see a young person lead a godly life. Even at my age, and I'm not that old. But man, it is so encouraging to me to see a teenager who has a desire to live for God, who reveals that through their actions and through their words, and is very obviously loving the Lord. That is encouraging to me. And to your church family, you can have a great positive impact to your church by making decisions for the Lord and keeping them. When I see you do things like stand up for your faith, when I hear stories of teenagers standing up for their faith in school, people making pure decisions, when I see you guys as young people serving at your church, coming to serve days where there's work days going on and helping out and doing everything you can for the Lord, helping out in different ways, being an encouragement to your pastor. Those kind of things are all just so great. It is a blessing to me as someone who's not a teenager anymore. And I'll tell you this is what it is as well. It is a challenge to me to do my very best to live for the Lord as well. I think sometimes we think that older people, when they see us doing stuff, they're going to be like, great, now I don't have to do it anymore, right? Now, there may be some element to that, all right? But I really believe if, as young people, if you guys would band together and really serve the Lord, and really in your lifestyle live for Him in a unique and in an exemplary way, I really believe that will motivate older Christians who maybe have fallen away from living for the Lord. It will motivate older Christians who maybe used to serve the Lord, but now they're maybe just coming and they're not really involved. But they see you doing that and help motivate them, and that's a way that you can be an example to them by serving in this way. It causes them to get stronger, to desire to live for the Lord, because I'll tell you this, I certainly don't want to let you guys down. And so it's like a motion that takes place as we serve the Lord as young people. It motivates older people. We don't want to let you down, so we're going to serve the Lord. And we have a whole group of people just encouraging one another in this way. So I want to challenge you with a couple of thoughts here real quick before we close. How you can be an example to your church family in your conduct. So I want to point out a couple of ways. So number one, underneath conduct, write this down. Be there. Number one, be there. Here's how you can be an example in your conduct to your church family. And this is the specific way. We know that you need to be an example to your unsafe friends, unsafe family members. We know that. But within this context of the church, just be there. Go to church. Can I get an amen? Okay, all right. Thank you for that. Yes. Just go, right? There's no reason to not go. Make being at your youth group and being at church your highest priority that will only be interrupted in the most extreme of circumstances. The most extreme of circumstances. Okay, hospitalization, death. No, okay. Listen, if there's some sport or some activity that would cause you to miss church, you need to very, very carefully evaluate your heart and your motivation in that. If you have a job, there is no way that a job should keep you from being in church, okay? All it takes, so many young people, they get jobs and they stop coming to church because they didn't have the guts to stand up to their boss and say, I can't work on Sunday. And then they stop going to church, and the next thing you know, they're never in church. And off they go, living a life without the Lord. It starts just so simply. But determine now that, hey, when a time comes and I get a job, I'm going to say, listen, I can't be there on Sundays. Okay? Start to have some actual, if that's the only job that you can find in the world, first of all, you need to get some more schooling or training or something. If the only job in the whole world that you can find is a Sunday job, okay, you're underqualified anyway, so go back to school or something. But you need to realize that, listen, these kind of things are just so important. Don't let every cough and every little sniffle keep you away from church. Man, some people, no, he just coughed. Leave now, you're going to infect all of us. See, that's how some people are, right? It's like, I think I'm going to stay home today. Okay, come on. Don't be like that. Be mature about it. Be there, all right? Now, if you're like sick and you have something that we could all die from, yes, please stay away. But just be brave about it, okay? Get your homework done on Saturday so you can be there on Sunday morning. That's not a reason to skip church because you didn't do your homework. Do you know what that is? That just tells us your immaturity right there. That's not being an example. Get your responsibilities taken care of. You can only be an example to people if you're around other people, right? And so you need to be there at your church. And I also think this, being there means that all of you is there, physically and mentally as well. Man, I was youth pastor for 9 years, and a lot of youth sit like Pastor Towns is sitting right now, just like that, right? Just sort of arms crossed, slouched back. I don't know if he's there or not. Like, he's there. He's physically there, but I don't know if he's really, I'm just picking on him. I know he's there. But man, so many teenagers, that's what they do. They come to church, they put their head down, they don't look around. They're just like, you're there, and you're like, I'm here. Speak to me, Lord. But you're not really there. Okay, so if you're going to be there, be there. Be all there. Be alert. Talk to people. All that kind of stuff, okay? Don't mentally check out. Be involved. And that brings me to my next point. Be there and then be all in. Be all in. Once you get to church, get involved. One of the best ways that you can be an example is to just be friendly to people. Engage them in conversation. Meet people. The temptation in life now and forever is to always gravitate to people that you like. to gravitate to people that are in your same situation or in your same life stage or have your same interests or whatever it may be. Challenge yourself to meet people that are different than you. Challenge yourself to go and strike up a conversation with someone in your church who's older than you, maybe much older than you, or younger than you. Find a way to kind of spread out a bit and meet more people and talk to more people. That's one of the problems, I think, in a lot of our churches, that everyone has friends at church, and then as soon as they get to church, they all just talk to their friends and they don't talk to anybody else. We need to be an example of that as young people and go and sit down and talk to somebody who's not like yourself. You'd be surprised the things that you learn about people. I love talking to all sorts of people, and I have friends who are old, I have friends who are young, I have a wide variance of friends because, man, I learned so much. I think it'd be great, Nathan, if you went and you found somebody in the balcony who you've never met in your entire life at church and went up and said, "Hello, my name is Nathan. Can I sit here next to you? I have a question about you." Now, that would weird them out, by the way, but I think it would be really great. You'd get to know somebody, and so then the next Sunday when they come into church, you know what they're going to be doing? They're going to be looking, where's that kid who came and talked to me last week, right? And they're, oh, there's Nathan. They might say, "Hey, Nathan, you have a friend, you know? They might be rich. You never know." I'm kidding. Oh. But you might meet somebody. And the point is that we need to be all in. So we need to be involved in the whole church body. We need to be an example to people this way. Look for people who are often overlooked. Look for people who are often overlooked. And you know who they are. There might be somebody in your youth group who comes in, maybe they come on their own or whatever, and they're just they're there, but nobody really connects. You go and be the friend of that person. That person in your church who maybe comes in that doesn't spend a lot of time with people or leaves right away, that maybe is overlooked by others, you go and speak to them. It is a great blessing to be able to see the body of Christ within our church family. They're connecting with each other in that unique way. I know this as a fact too. Older Christians are tremendously blessed when a young person comes to them and speaks to them and greets them. Many older Christians look at the youth, and they think a couple of things about you. Are you ready? I'm going to tell you a secret. They think they have no time for anyone but themselves. That's one of the big things that they think. You know why? Because that's how you act, right? I got no time for anybody but myself, and maybe a few friends. They sometimes feel that you're immature, and that's a process of growth. I realize that. But a lot of those thoughts about you, simply because they just don't know you very well, right? We've all we've all perceived people in the wrong way. We thought things about them. You get to know them. You're like, "Oh, I thought you were a jerk. You're really nice," you know. And so it's good for us to be all in, and that means to go to people and connect with people that you maybe normally wouldn't connect with. And you got to realize it's a real blessing to older Christians. And I'm not just saying like really old. I'm just saying like older people than you. It's a blessing to them if you would just come and talk to them and have a conversation with them. Man, you would really encourage them. That would be an example to them to maybe go and then do the same to somebody else. To help break us out of our little groups, right? Doesn't mean that you have people that you aren't closer to. We all have people that we connect with on a deeper level and all of that. But all of us should be an example by reaching out and being all in and just being involved. The other way that we should be there or be involved is to be a servant. Be a servant. I'm almost done. One more after this. Be a servant. The way that you can be an example is to look for ways to serve in the church, especially in the areas of the church that have low visibility. There are some people who are specially called and specially gifted for more public ministry, and God may call some of you to serve Him in music ministries publicly or in preaching and teaching, all of those kind of things, and God gifts us in different ways. But I got to tell you, I think a lot more people than they think are far better equipped to do some of the behind-the-scenes work. And that is so, so important. That's why God spent so much time talking about how we need to be faithful in the little things, right? And then He'll make us faithful in bigger things. But as a young person, one of the best things you can do is to just be a servant. Volunteer for the lowest jobs. Pastor says, "Hey, I need somebody to come and rake the leaves," or "I need somebody to help me move something." Be like, "I'll be there." Oh yeah, free pizza. There's always pizza involved in everything, by the way. It's like somewhere in the Bible. And thou shalt serve and slice. All right, something like that. But to volunteer for those lower jobs that maybe somebody else doesn't want to do. And then do the job with joy without demanding any sort of gratitude, and be content to be overlooked. If you can learn to be content with being overlooked, it will serve you well your entire life. Pride is such a destroyer. Such a destroyer. And if we can learn to serve the Lord with joy out of a heart of love for Him, being okay with being overlooked, be faithful in the little things, not worrying about having the spotlight, not having to have the recognition for everything. That's one of the great issues of the generation that you guys are moving into right now, is the desire to always be recognized for everything. That there has to be a pat on the back or a great job or a high five or a $100 bill for everything that we do. Okay, listen, that's not real life, first of all, and that's not the heart of a servant. The heart of a servant is willing to serve the Lord, willing to do things that maybe others wouldn't do, with a heart of love, and allow God to be the one to get the glory through your service, even if nobody else knows about it. We need a resurgence of that. That was some generations before where people just wanted to serve the Lord. But unfortunately, a lot of that generation is getting quite a bit older, and they're struggling in serving that way. And we need a generation to come behind them, your generation, who's willing to just serve God behind the scenes and be a servant. That's a very scriptural principle. It's so easy to, if we're always desiring to be noticed for everything, it's easy to become bitter when we're not noticed. And so if you just go into serving the Lord and just say, I'm going to serve God no matter what, that would be life-changing for you. And then lastly, we're to be a servant, but we're also to be visible. And you say, oh, aren't those two different things? I just said, be invisible, and then also be visible. Yes, there's two different things here. We don't need to be afraid to be visible. And I mean it this way. When you sing with your church family and you're in a worship service, sing out. Look up. Engage in the worship service. Be a part of it. Be an example in your singing. When you listen to sermons in your church, be an example to the church around you. I love it. At Greater Vancouver, where I was for so long, and still today, where do all the teens sit, right? In the front rows. And we do that for a couple of reasons. Number one, to keep your attention. Number two, for your parents to see you at all times, at every moment, right? But the problem is often this is what they see. You want to see what they see? All right, that was you giggling, all right? That's what they see. And they're like, what are they doing up there? They're not engaging in the service. Their head's down the whole time. So here's what I'm saying. Engage, all right? Be visible in your expression, your example. So pay attention. When Pastor Connor tells a joke, or Pastor Spence tells a joke, or Pastor Towns tells a joke, or whatever, laugh. That was a good one. No, don't be weird about it. I'm just kidding. But take notes. There are so many adults who don't take notes. So many adults that don't take notes. But I also know some adults who take notes because the teens take notes. And they're like, oh, if they're doing it, maybe I should do it. I mean, be involved, be engaged in that way. Be visible in your example. Put what you've learned into practice. Be attentive. Be an example in your diligence and your faithfulness and your willingness to get outside of your comfort zone and recognize that the very idea behind being an example is that somebody is going to see you. That was the whole point of the illustration last night, is that if we're going to make our lives a life worth imitating, we've got to be putting an example out there in the first place. And again, it's from the right heart. This is not about you, okay? This is not about, hey, look at me, all right? This is about serving the Lord, and the benefit of serving the Lord with the right heart is that you can be an example and you can have an impact in other people to be seen so that you can be imitated. Too many people imitate negative influences, right? So many people want to be like some famous person who puts themselves out there online, or they want to be like some movie star or whatever. And so much negativity is imitated. It's time for us as Christian young people to be worth imitating, but because of who we worship, because of who we follow, and it's God. And so in our conduct, in our actions, this is a start for us that we can be an example to the believers here in our conduct. This is a very special calling for us as young Christians, to be an example to the Lord, for God, be an example to believers in both our words and in our conduct. And so in a minute, when we split up into our groups, the questions are going to be specifically about what we just talked about. And so I want to encourage you. Last night, if you weren't really engaged in the conversation, would you be there? Would you be all in? All right? So engage yourself in this. Be an example to one another by engaging yourself in the questions that your leader brings up and the discussion that follows, and you will be helped by it.